In this video, you will learn how to find the area of a parallelogram. Now, a parallelogram, remember, is a quadrilateral, or a shape with four sides, in which both pair of opposite sides are parallel. So, for example, we could have a picture like this, which would be a rectangle. All right, we could have a square is also a parallelogram. We have this kind of shape right here, where things are slanted. This would be a parallelogram, or we could have a rhombus, which would also classify as a parallelogram. So for all these shapes, we have two sets of parallel sides. Right, the top and the bottoms of all these are parallel, and then the left and right sides of these shapes are parallel also. So these are four different types of parallelograms that you could see. So the first type is a rectangle. So rectangle, here we have the bottom is 3 inches, and then the side is 2 inches. For any parallelogram, your formula to find the area is the base times the height. Now to illustrate that with a rectangle, the base is 3 inches. The height would be 2 inches. Alright, so we could just take 3 times 2 to get 6 as your area. Now, what this actually means though is if you were to imagine creating squares inside of the rectangle, and the squares are 1 inch by 1 inch. So here is one square where each side is 1 inch in length. So 1 inch and then 1 inch. And then create another square like this, where now this is 1 inch and 1 inch as well. And then one more where this is 1 inch and then this side is 1 inch. Okay, so notice what we have. This entire base is 3 inches, and then we now have this top half up here we can fill in with squares as well. If we do that, notice we have 6 squares that we've created, and each of these squares has dimensions of 1 inch by 1 inch. So this rectangle, we would say the area is 6 square inches. So 6 square inches, or 6 inches squared. And basically what that means is that we can fill in this rectangle with 6 squares, and each square is 1 inch by 1 inch. Okay? And to calculate that, we just take the base times the height, 3 inches times 2 inches, to get 6 square inches, or inches squared. So notice this would be your units. Alright? And typically we write it like this because it's quicker to write than writing square inches. But either way, we get the same solution. And another way of thinking through the units is if you keep the units in there, so like the 2 inches and the 3 inches, to find the area, we multiply those together, right? Well, 2 times 3 is 6. And then if we keep the units, inches times inches, we now have inches squared. So that's another way to think through the rationale of the units being square inches or inches squared. Next we have a square, which is also a type of parallelogram. And here again we can imagine filling this square in with smaller squares, where each square is 1 inch by 1 inch. If we do that, we're going to get 4 squares that have units of 1 inch by 1 inch. So we can say the area of the square is 4 square inches because we filled it up with 4 squares that are inch by inch. Okay, 4 square inches, or 4 inches squared. So if we want to calculate that instead of filling it up with smaller squares, again, area of a parallelogram, we take area equals the base, or the bottom, times the height. Times the height. Okay, the height would be the perpendicular, or the 90 degree side. So the side that's 90 degrees, or perpendicular to the base. Alright, so here the base was 2, and the height is 2, so we take 2 times 2, which is 4, then the units would be inches squared. So that is the quicker way to calculate this area. And with a square, by the way, each side is the same length. So sometimes you'll see this written as side times side, or side squared. So if your square, let's say, was 5 inches by 5 inches, we just take 5 times 5 to get our area, or think of that as 5 squared, which is the same thing as 5 times 5, or 25 square inches. So we've dealt with rectangles, we've dealt with squares, which are both types of parallelograms, and here we have just a straight up parallelogram that cannot be classified as any other specific type of shape. So again, the area of a parallelogram is found by taking the base times the height. Now for this one, just be careful that you get your height correct. So the base is going to be, I guess, the bottom, and the height is going to be perpendicular or 90 degrees to the base. So see this 2 inches right here? This red line is 2 inches. That is your height because it is perpendicular to the base. Alright, so your base would be 3, your height would be 2, so we have 3 times 2, which is 6 square inches. And if it's helpful to visualize why this would also be true, why is it still base times height for this shape, imagine if you were to straighten up the sides, the left and right side of this parallelogram. If you straightened the sides up, you're going to get this shape right here. Alright, you would get the 2 still as your height, and 3 is your base. And this is a rectangle, which we've said already, the area is base times height. Right, we can fill up with little squares, and we've proven that to be true, where the area would be 6 square inches. So that's the rationale behind the formula, but using the formula, we just take the 3 times 2, and we get 6 square inches. Lastly, we have a rhombus, which is another specific type of parallelogram. And this type of shape, a rhombus, has each side length equaling the same measure. So like here, this side is 12 inches, and the bottom is also 12 inches. So this would be a rhombus, but it's also a type of parallelogram because the opposite sides are parallel. So just like with any parallelogram, the area would be found by taking the base times the height. So again, be careful that you are taking the correct numbers. Alright, so the base and the height are perpendicular to each other. So if the base is 12, the height here would be 10 because that is perpendicular or 90 degrees to the base. So the base is 12, the height is 10. We take 12 times 10 to get 120, and the units would be inches squared or square inches. So your formula for parallelogram is base times height. That would include a rectangle, a square, a rhombus, or just a regular parallelogram that is not classified as any other specific type of shape. And for each of those, the formula is base times height. And lastly, just be careful with the height. Make sure you are taking the measurement of the height that is perpendicular to the base. And to finish, here we have a problem. Here we are told that a parallelogram has a base of 5 meters and the area is 40 meters squared. And the question is, what is the height? So in this specific case, you are given the area and the base, and you're trying to find the height. Well, we know it's a parallelogram, and we know the formula is A equals base times height. Here we plug in what we know. So the area we know is 40, the base we know is 5, and the height is unknown. So here I have a little equation. 40 equals 5 times height. Solve this for height. We can do that by dividing both sides by 5. We now have height equals 40 divided by 5, which is 8. So the height is equal to 8, and the units are meters. So I have 8 meters as my height. And that concludes our lesson for today. We will see you next time.